I know in France, they talk about the pouvoir d'achat all the time. What's your purchasing power? Well, they always want that to be increasing. But then when it comes to talking about consumer price inflation, they always say, oh, well, we need 2% consumer price inflation. And so I think that the other deflationary part that is really doesn't work for folks is with regards to the state. And so the state benefits through seigniorage by having a monopoly on the currency and being the only issuer of it, that they're able to capture all that value. And that's to our expense in the form of inflation. But they want it to seem like, oh, it's to our benefit in the form of inflation. They want to prevent you from creating more of that local currency through the commercial banking system. So they're trying to throttle the commercial banking system, not by raising interest rates, but by changing the conditions or the prerequisites or what the end use of the credit can be. That way they can slow money supply growth and tackle inflation through a political rationing process rather than a market-based rationing process. What Bitcoin's success will be about is that people will be able to use it as their payment protocol, as their that standard, and that eventually, because it's so much easier to set up than Stripe or anything else, that where you have to get permission and you have to have a physical mailing address and all of that, it'll just be a default on a lot of things. And then if you want to use fiat, then you have to essentially upgrade.
Bitcoin is on the brink of challenging the entire financial system, but how exactly will it do that? Pierre Rochard breaks down how inflation, deflation, and the failings of fiat currencies are pushing us toward a revolution. You won't believe the strategy that's already in play for Bitcoin to dominate.
So I think that deflation is bad and inflation is good when you have a fractional reserve banking system. And that with deflation, if the value of the debts is going up, then that's just going to be bad for the debtor. And furthermore, from the banking perspective, they create money by lending it out through the fractional reserve system. And so I think that the entire inflationary system, in a sense, is geared towards benefiting the commercial banking system, and it's a completely, captured interest. So if we remove that part of the puzzle, if we remove the fractional reserve banking system, then it's obvious that deflation is just people's purchasing power increasing. I know in France, they talk about the pouvoir d'achat all the time. What's your purchasing power? Well, they always want that to be increasing. But then when it comes to talking about consumer price inflation, they always say, oh, well, we need 2% consumer price inflation. And so I think that the other deflationary part that is really doesn't work for folks is with regards to the state. And so the state benefits through seigniorage by having a monopoly on the currency and being the only issuer of it, that they're able to capture all that value. And that's to our expense in the form of inflation. But they want it to seem like, oh, it's to our benefit in the form of inflation. So I think that the vested interests are essentially the banking system and the state working cooperatively to create the fiat system. But within mainstream economics, if you talk to competent mainstream economists, they don't think that theory is explanatory in the sense that if they understand what happened with computers, right? That the price of computers went down, people still buy computers because they still want the utility, even if that means that they will miss out, on improved purchasing power later. Yeah. So what the part of the theory that they really hang their hat on outside of the banking system, because I don't think they even really understand that intersection, is with wages. And so they say that you want to have increasing wages so that you don't have unemployment, and that you have wage stickiness, essentially, where if you have deflation, then people won't accept jobs because they want to make more money, not make less money, and so you'll have higher inflation. And it's basically this trade-off between saying that we want to have less unemployment and lower wages instead of higher wages and marginally more unemployment. It comes down to the fact that with inflation, the workers have to go ask for a raise proactively, whereas with deflation, it's the employers that have to ask for wage cuts proactively. And so it just gives, one party power over the negotiation. If the default is to just let it stay, then the default is that the workers win with deflation. With inflation, the default is that the employer lawyers win because of the wages. So that, I think, is essentially the case for inflation, and I think it's a really weak one. Bitcoin produces certainty.
Yes.
And the fiat system, even when we look at, for example, the interest rate monetary policy for the Federal Reserve, they're always trying to maximize uncertainty. They don't want people to know what they're going to do. That way they're able to manage those expectations and be able to shift economic activity around. And so it really is, it's like the just polar opposites, where with fiat you have maximum uncertainty on the supply side, so meaning that they can print $1 trillion. They got infinite cash, as Neil Kashkari said, and then on the Bitcoin side, it's maximum risk because the supply is fixed. And so it's really, in Austrian economics, they talk about uncertainty versus risk. Fiat is a uncertainty maximizing system, and Bitcoin is a risk maximizing system. For now, I imagine perhaps if we reach 100% adoption, then the price volatility, the purchasing power volatility of Bitcoin will decrease. Is it going to be the case that Bitcoin is just going to be this asset that lives its own life but does not ever replace fiat? Or is there some kind of mechanism that we can observe, but historically, but also, praxeologically describe that would cause one currency to replace another? And so, we have political processes like the euro replacing European currencies. But then there's also market-based processes of dollarization and speculative attacks. So in a speculative attack, it's really about exploiting the weak monetary policy of one currency in order to short it and to benefit off of its devaluation versus a stronger currency. The only way to defend against the speculative attack, which I wrote about in the article, was either to strengthen the monetary policy of the weak currency by raising interest rates, which can cause all sorts of other problems for the domestic banking system and, of course, for the politicians in that situation. The second is capital controls, where you're saying, okay, we're going to keep the interest rate the same, but we're going to introduce political factors into describing who can have access to this credit so that we can slow down money supply growth. And so here you would say, okay, you're not allowed to borrow the weak currency to buy a luxury car or to, buy a mortgage greater than X value. Mm-hmm. They want to prevent you from creating more of that local currency through the commercial banking system. So they're trying to throttle the commercial banking system, not by raising interest rates, but by changing the conditions or the prerequisites or what the end use of the credit can be. That way they can slow money supply growth and tackle inflation through a political rationing process rather than a market-based rationing process.
Pierre Rochard offers a bold perspective on how deflation and inflation impact the economy. He argues that inflation benefits the banking system and state while hurting consumers. In a world of fractional reserve banking, inflation allows banks to profit from debt. But Bitcoin disrupts this model, offering a fixed supply that reduces uncertainty. Rochard critiques the mainstream belief that inflation is necessary for economic health, drawing parallels between price drops in technology and the wage-driven concerns of deflation. As Bitcoin continues to rise, Rochard argues that the failure of fiat currencies could lead to a speculative attack, where Bitcoin replaces traditional money. The implications for governments and global finance are staggering, and Rochard's insight into Bitcoin's future is one you can't afford to miss.
If you're trying to stop people from using Bitcoin to borrow dollars, you can freeze people out of the banking system. And we've actually seen some of that here in the US in different forms. So I definitely think that if it's used in a targeted manner, it can be effective. Usually it stops being effective when it's all they're relying on. So they have a very loose monetary policy, but then they're trying to clamp down on all the capital controls, and then people start engaging in money laundering, and that becomes profitable. But the third, which I did not describe in the article that I should have mentioned, is actually what was discussed in the IMF paper that I was elaborating on, which is to accumulate a reserve of Bitcoin. And then that way you're able to have a credible way of defending your monetary policy against Bitcoin by the threat of selling the Bitcoin. And so I think that it's the option value of holding the Bitcoin that is the most important thing to focus in on, because so this is why I think MicroStrategy, their stock price has gone up, their bonds are doing very well. It's because it is backed by the best asset, and that there's no reason why you couldn't do that at the government level to head off a speculative attack. Now, then we can get into is that what they're actually going to do or not? I don't know. They might not be smart enough to do it. But also, essentially, that means Bitcoin wins, because at that point, it's a layer 3 scaling solution of, okay, their currency is backed by Bitcoin indirectly, but enough to essentially constrain them and to help the people of that country have access to Bitcoin. And so I think that, it's not perfect because it's custodial and all of that, but it's the first step towards total Bitcoinization. What Bitcoin success will be about is that people will be able to use it as their payment protocol, as their that standard, and that eventually, because it's so much easier to set up than Stripe or anything else, where you have to get permission and you have to have a physical mailing address and all of that, it'll just be a default on a lot of things. And then if you want to use fiat, then you have to essentially upgrade. I feel like the reason why BlackRock has really embraced Bitcoin is because we can divide Wall Street into two different groups. One group is trying to generate alpha, and so they're promising returns that are greater than the market, and they're going to actively manage things and trade things. Then the other half of Wall Street, they just charge a very low flat fee, and they're just going to give you a market return, and it's passive management, and they're not trying to trade. So I think that the passive group is very interested in Bitcoin, and then the active group, they either hate it or they see it as a Beanie Baby tulip mania thing that they can trade.
Rochard's analysis shows that Bitcoin isn't just a digital currency. It's a game changer for the global financial system. As fiat currencies crumble under their own weight, Bitcoin presents a future of economic certainty. Bitcoin is poised to replace fiat in ways we never thought possible. The question is, will you be ready when the shift happens? As more institutional players like BlackRock embrace Bitcoin, the move toward a decentralized future seems inevitable. Stay informed, stay ahead, and subscribe for more expert insights into the future of money.